Now, I'm not one to gossip, but I will bring you the tea. Welcome to Chronicle Speaks.
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
Look at you.
So the moment we've all been waiting for, the trial of the century, is officially underway. Before opening statements today, 12 jurors and 6 alternates were sworn in, selected after Judge Arun Subramanian grilled them on what they had already seen and heard about the allegations against Mr. Sean P. Diddy Combs. Judge Arun Subramanian told each juror that breakfast and lunch would be provided for them each day of what is expected to be an 8-week trial to make their experience as pleasant as possible. The judge also told them that their personal information, their names, and identifying information will not be disclosed to the public. Now, Mark Agnifilo, Diddy's head lawyer, said to the judge that the government struck 7 black potential jurors and asked the government to give neutral reasoning for their strikes, unrelated to their race. The prosecution replied that it had not demonstrated any bias during jury selection and it had a very diverse group of jurors. Maureen Comey, one of the lead prosecutors, is going through their reasoning for striking black potential jurors. One candidate cited multiple negative run-ins with the police that concerned the government. Another one expressed that he may not be able to avoid news coverage about the case. Well, the jury was finally selected, 8 men, 4 women, and among the alternates, there are 2 women and 4 men, so it's a majority of men. Now, the jurors range in age from their 30s to their 70s. They all live in Manhattan, the Bronx, and Westchester County. Now, the panel includes a massage therapist, an investment analyst, a scientist, and a deli clerk. Several of the jurors reported that they had seen the video of Sean Combs assaulting his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, and this happens to be the central incident of the trial. Now, the jury is sworn in, and the judge gives them their basic instructions, including definitions of legal terms. The judge says that just because a witness uses a pseudonym does not mean that their testimony is less worthy of any weight. During the trial, do not read or view or listen to anything about this case, and don't post anything. Once the U.S. rests, the defense can present should he want to. Now, just like with any case, each juror is given their own notebook so they can take notes during the trial, but unfortunately for them, they're not able to take these notes home. So sometimes they're asked to write their own jury number on the notebook and they hand it to the court staff at the end of each day. Now, there's 6 prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York handling the case against Mr. Sean P. Diddy Combs. Of those 6, we have Maureen Comey, who is a top attorney from the Southern District of New York, and she's got a strong track record handling major racketeering cases, just like the one Diddy is facing now. Comey has nearly 10 years of experience as a federal prosecutor. She also worked on the high-profile case against Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted for helping Jeffrey Epstein exploit underage girls. In fact, Comey was one of the prosecutors originally handling Epstein's criminal case before he died in jail. Prosecutor Johnson opened the trial by telling the jury that there is a darker side to Sean P. Diddy Combs, one the public never saw. There was another side to Diddy, she said, a side that ran a criminal empire. She said, "This is Sean Combs. To the public, he was a cultural icon, a businessman, larger than life, but there was another side to him. You will hear about 20 years of the defendant's crimes." And she made it clear that Diddy did not act alone. He had an inner circle, bodyguards and top employees who helped him pull it off and keep it hidden from the world. They hid things like kidnapping, arson, drugs, sex crimes. Let's start with one night. He was on the hunt for his girlfriend, Cassie. He forced her to have sex with male escorts while he watched and recorded it. He found out Cassie was seeing another man. Furious, he set out to find Cassie and this other man. With this opening statement, Prosecutor Johnson painted a disturbing picture. Just one example, she said, of many crimes Sean P. Diddy Combs is accused of committing over the years. She goes on to say that he woke up an employee to drive to the house, but no one was there. The defendant didn't give up there. He kept looking for Cassie. When he found her, he beat her brutally, kicking her in the back and flinging her around like a rag doll. But it wasn't enough. He told Cassie, "I can release videos of you having sex sex with male escorts. He broke into a man's house and he beat and blackmailed his girlfriend. These are not his only crimes. Cassie is not the only woman he beat and sexually exploited. These are 20 years of crimes. He had a business, Bad Boy Records, that made him, right? He relied on his bodyguards, chief of staff, who all ran different aspects of his life. The group promoted his power. His bodyguards kidnapped an employee and set a car on fire and dangled a person over a balcony. They delivered drugs whenever he said, including to a woman he forced to have sex with an escort. He transported them across state lines and even out of the country. Let me be very clear. This case is not about celebrities' private sexual preferences. This is a criminal. He coerced and even used violence. Now, with this trial, we will follow two women, Cassie and Jane Doe. We will show that he used his lies, drugs, threats of violence to force them to have sex with him in front of male escorts. Now, he called these wild events freak-offs, wild king nights, or hotel nights. His staff organized flights, cars, and hotels. At his direction, his staff set up the room with lubricant and lighting. Staff came in with cash to pay the escorts and drugs. She goes on to say that Sean P. Diddy Combs expected his inner circle to cater to his sexual desires. He sometimes called himself the king, and he expected to be treated like one. The prosecutor said that the company's resources were used to help him sexually exploit multiple women, including by having them have sex with male prostitutes in front of him. She argues that this is not a sexual preference. She says that Combs made women have sex when they didn't want to, threatening them, drugging them, and using violence to coerce them into these sexual desires of his. Cassie Ventura and another woman who they are calling Jane Doe were directed on what to wear, what drugs to take, and then on every step of the sexual activity. He made them take MDMA or Molly and ecstasy, and it made them sick, but it also made them sexually aroused. He directed every step. He expected the women to appear to enjoy themselves. Now, he pleasured himself and recorded the events. Now, Cassie was just 19 years old with a hit song at the time. Cassie tried to work on her music, but the defendant made her turn down many opportunities. She recorded, but he had the final say over the music she released. There was never another album. He hit Cassie in the head and dragged her by the hair. As you will see in this trial, he beat her in the hallway of a hotel to drag her back into a freak-off. Initially, she wanted to make him happy, but then she didn't want to. But the defendant made her. The consequences were severe. He beat her when she would take too long in the bathroom. Defying him would end up in violence. She fled, but he always found her with the help of his inner circle. Cassie's career was in his hands, and he told her he could destroy her career by releasing a video. When he said to have a freak off, she knew she had no choice. She called the escort and put on a performance he wanted. Her safety depended on keeping him happy. The relationship was complicated. Both were unfaithful, but only one of them had the power. He made Cassie do things in those dark hotel rooms. Cassie was not the only one. There was a pattern. Let me tell you about Jane. She was a single mom that started spending time with him in 2020. Side note, many people are saying that this particular Jane Doe happens to be Daphne Joy, which is the baby mother of his nemesis, Mr. 50 Cent. But let's continue. One night, he told Jane about freak-offs, and they made it happen immediately. He took her to a hotel where an escort was on the way. He directed her step by step. Jane thought it was a one-time wild night. She was wrong, but he continued offering a real relationship. Now, Jane wanted the escort to wear condoms, but the defendant did not let them. Jane tried to make it through these wild nights without drugs. The first time she broke down and took ecstasy to finish. Another time she vomited, but he said, "Go do it again." Jane said, "I'm gonna fix you, Diddy." She found two men and invited them to join the freak-off so she could choose the men that she wanted to be intimate with. The defendant discouraged her from working. He had the power to coerce her back into the hotel room, and he threatened her with violence. Now, not even a year ago, he went to her house. She was angry. She hit him. He became enraged. She tried to hide. She locked herself in her bedroom. He kicked it open. Then the bathroom, the closet, the guest bedroom. He kicked her to the ground. ground. Now, if you recall, during Diddy's arraignment back in September, prosecutors referenced an alleged phone call with a woman in which Combs made a thinly veiled reference to continuing his financial support of the woman if she continued to be by his side. He pretty much told this woman, the sex that we had, you wanted to have it, right? This wasn't a freak off. We were doing what we wanted to do, right? He allegedly directed an associate to make sure that this alleged victim's rent was paid on time. He said, don't do anything stupid. Now, the prosecution goes on to say that one night, Sean Combs became enraged at Jane after a dispute over seeing him with another woman. Now, Jane ran around the house trying to escape him, but Combs grabbed her in a chokehold, lifted her off the ground by her neck, and kicked her to the ground. At the end of the ordeal, Combs instructed Jane to call an escort for a freak-off. He made her cover up her black eye, take an ecstasy pill, and perform for the defendant. Now, the prosecution has introduced a third woman accusing Sean Combs of coercing her into sex, referring to her by the pseudonym Mia. Now, the prosecution says that this is a former employee, but she will testify about the times that Combs forced himself onto her sexually, including forcing her to perform oral sex and sneaking into her bed and penetrating her against her will. So the prosecution told the jury that an incident at the center of the case represented a pattern of Sean Combs' employees trying to cover up his crimes. This incident is the assault of Cassie in a Los Angeles hotel back in 2016. Now, after the assault was captured on surveillance video, the prosecutor Johnson says that Combs and his chief of staff contacted the hotel security guard to broker a deal. Combs ended up giving the guard a brown paper bag filled with $100,000 in cash and essentially buying the hotel's surveillance footage. Now, we know that any attempts to cover up this did not work because CNN published the footage last year and the jury is expected to see parts of it. So the prosecutor, Emily Johnson, starts to review some of the evidence that the jury should expect, the text messages about the prostitutes, including Combs asking staff for money to pay them. Now, videos of Combs assaulting Cassie Ventura are also included in the things that she's looking at, and videos of some of the freak-offs, which the government says show that Combs was directing the encounters. You will see for yourself the defendant's violence and its aftermath, Johnson said. She ends her argument by saying this: I ask you to do three things. Pay attention to the evidence, follow the judge's instructions on the law, and use your common sense, and you will reach the verdict that Sean Combs is guilty. The judge says, who's for the defense? Teeny Garrigo says, I will. Now, Sean Combs is backed by a powerful and growing legal team led by some of the country's top defense attorneys. Now, his main attorneys include Mark Agnifilo and Teeny Garrigos. Now, Agnifilo, we've all seen his work. We're not really impressed. Teeny Garrigos, we've seen her work as well. She is the daughter of Mark Garrigos, who represented Michael Jackson and Chris Brown. Also on the defense team is Alexandra Shapiro, who is a top appeals lawyer who once clerked for Supreme Court Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Legal experts say if anyone can help flip a verdict on appeal, it's definitely her. And in recent weeks, Combs has brought on even more of a legal firepower, including Brian Steele, known for defending Young Thug and challenging courtroom corruption, and Xavier Donaldson, a seasoned New York trial lawyer. Despite already having 4 law firms, Combs recently tried to delay the trial, citing new evidence, and the judge denied each request, saying he has more than enough legal resources, and since then, he's hired 2 more attorneys. Teeny Garrigo starts her statement by saying this case is about love and jealousy and money. They are trying to turn it into a racketeering case, but it will not work. You are the jury. You will evaluate the witnesses, and finally the story can come out. This case isn't about what you heard on the news. Sean Combs is fascinating. He grew up in Harlem and built lawful businesses. He worked for it. He created a culture and produced music that changed a generation. Witnesses will share with you that he is a fascinating person and people are drawn to him. He had a vision that few had. The witnesses mostly loved him. The text messages will show that. He is 55 years old. He is going to be Sean Combs. I am Teeny Garrigos. I am honored to represent him. The only people in this courtroom who will tell you about racketeering are the prosecution. There was no conspiracy. This case is about Sean Combs' private sex life. The government has no business in that. These hardworking individuals were educated. From Harvard to Howard University, he had a temper and got violent. He is not proud of that. We own it. He sometimes gets so jealous or angry, he is out of control. You will hear that he lied to his girlfriends. You may think he's a jerk or he's mean. He's not being tried for that. He's tried for running a racketeering enterprise. This is domestic violence. Domestic violence is not sex trafficking. Had he been charged with domestic violence, we would not be sitting through a 8-week trial. He is not guilty of these crimes. As the trial goes on, we are going to take on accountability. We will not shy away. Sean Combs has a bit of a different sex life. The alleged victims were all getting something from him. They are adults. They too take on responsibility for their lives as he does for his. A free choice has pros and cons. You will evaluate these women. They made free choices every day for years. Ask yourself, what are all the ways this individual had the ability to make these choices? Ask, what is this person getting? Something they want? It may differ. Jealousy drove choices of these victims. Combs never married, but he is a many-woman man. He is always in multiple relationships. He was not always honest. It drove a primal jealousy. Sean Combs is extremely jealous. You might think it's hypocritical. They remained in multi-year relationships with him. These women were in love with him. Infidelity and jealousy drove the violence. Alcohol and drugs drove things, but he is not a racketeer. This case is about his relationship with Cassie and Jane. Of course, you're going to hear about swinger parties. They're going to testify about things that should never be heard in a federal courtroom. That he liked to watch? You may not like that, but you are not here to judge him for his sexual preference. A wealthy rapper paid for these women's homes and vacations. He is not charged with being a flawed individual. These women fought to be in a relationship with him. Cassie, I expect you will hear from her this week about her 11-year relationship. Combs with Kim Porter, the mother of 4 of his children. He continued with her until the death from pneumonia in 2018. His fights with Cassie were about cheating. It was a toxic relationship. They loved each other. Cassie will tell you about the jealousy of Kim Porter. Then Gina, the day of the hotel hallway, jealousy was on display. Violence by the elevator bank 10 years ago. You will see it later today. What Combs did is indefensible. The video is not evidence of sex trafficking. Cassie walked out of the hotel room with 2 bags. Combs comes down wearing only a towel. He stomps her and drags her by her hoodie. He comes back around to get a phone. What causes a fight about a phone? Phones keep the secrets of infidelity. As soon as he gets the phone, he sits down. He's visibly disgusted. Cassie calls security. You will hear from him later today. The guards tell him to leave the public area. You will see Cassie telling him to get back to the hotel room. They stay together 2 more years after this incident. Even in 2018, they are fighting to stay together. She saw a photo of Combs with Gina. He started with her in 2014. Cassie had a choice every single day to stay with him. That was her better choice until she broke up with him. She was not coerced. When she left, there was no repercussions. She ran into the arms of a physical trainer Combs had hired to train her. The only freak-offs you will see at the trial were on her phone, not his. In November of 2018, Kim Porter passes away from pneumonia. Cassie did everything to be there for him. She flew to Georgia amidst the breakup. She flew to be with him. Combs said, "Kim was my soulmate." The end of the relationship between Combs and Cassie was triggered by that. Cassie realized all the things she would not be. She wanted to be Combs' wife, the love of his life. She spent 11 years trying to get that. Cassie married the trainer and is pregnant with their 3rd child. Evaluate Combs' intent at the time for those 11 years. The messages will show. Cassie's testimony this week can't change that. In 2020 with Jane, Combs was more upfront. He told her he was dating other women. She was still jealous. Jane wanted it public. He proposed a consensual threesome. They went to a private hotel. I expect her to say that she enjoyed it. Jane was desperate to be with him, to give him things others couldn't. could, she tried to make it more than sexual. Jane did it for the cuddle. She wanted to make him happy. She was unable to resist him emotionally. There was a phone call in November 2023, and even after it, she flew out to see him many more times. It was toxic, but she was willing. Being a willing participant in your sex life is not sex trafficking. If she walked away, she would have lost him. You will see her jealousy. She would see him on social media with another woman, and she would send messages of regret. It's not coerced. She was driven to try to be in first place. This was a way to try to get there. That is not a crime. There was a night a year ago when Jane hit Combs. It was born out of jealousy. He hit her back. She was overcome by jealousy. She slammed his head. After slamming his head on the kitchen counter, months later, she flew to see him and invited an escort. She will call it one of her best nights, a wild king night, whatever you want to call it. This will be hard to watch. They are, in one word, intimate. The government told you about someone named Mia. Why are they making these allegations now? You will conclude that everyone has a motive. With Mia, she never said it before, nor when she first started cooperating with the government. If this is so hostile, why didn't they call the police? They are vindictive. Their motive is simple: money. Cassie filed a public lawsuit in November 2023. She was living in her parents' modest home in Connecticut. She went to a civil lawyer. The civil lawyer is here today. They went to the civil lawyers to make a money grab. Cassie demanded $30 million. Another asked for $22 million. How many millions of reasons do these witnesses have to lie? The evidence will not make out the charges. On bribery, this is about the Intercontinental Hotel. He paid a security guard to make the footage go away. This was solely to prevent bad publicity for Combs and for Cassie. There was no law enforcement investigation. The kidnapping related to an employee. She worked for him for 10 years. She asked to work for him again. Drug trafficking, it was personal use. They worked hard. They were there to do something great and noble. It was a free choice. These are no conspiracies. He was paying different men for their time and experience. Porn actors get paid. Hulkamania, cowboy, and agents. You can pay money for time and experience. That is what Sean Combs was doing. You are not here to impose your morality on this man. If you listen, you will find him not guilty of these crimes. Thank you. So they end up breaking for lunch and the jury leaves. When they do, Brian Steele, who's now representing Diddy, also used to represent Young Thug in the YSL trial, which he did win, stated to the judge, "We will be objecting at least 2 exhibits." The judge said, "In the future, I'd like to hear about this at least the day before." So the security guard wrote in the 3rd paragraph of the incident report that he did not want Mr. Combs to see Cassie out in front. He talks about a co-worker, Addie, A-D-E-Y, and Mr. Combs is about to yell. That is a speculation and should not go in. The judge said that the objection is well taken and it is excluded. He then lets the jury back in. He calls LAPD officer Isbriel Flores and he is then sworn in. "I'm also a reservist for the Army," he says. "I was a guard with Securitas in 2016 in the Intercontinental Hotel near Century City." Prosecutor said, "What type of incidents do you respond to?" He said, "All kinds. We've had a couple of unalivings there. We prepare incident reports." Prosecutor said, "Would you attach pictures to the reports?" He says, "Yes, but not videos. We do not have the password." Prosecutor said, "When did this incident take place?" He said 11 o'clock a.m. "I got a report of a woman in distress on the 6th floor. I closed the security base and checked the cameras. There was an African-American man pacing back and forth. I didn't see a female. I rushed there." Prosecutor said, "What did you see on the 6th floor?" He says, "Mr. Combs in a towel and some like colored socks. He's a rapper, producer, and Cassie on the floor." Prosecutor said, "Let me show you photos." So they show him photos of Mr. Combs in a tuxedo, and on a separate photo, they show him Cassie Ventura, and she's smiling. Prosecutor said, "What did you tell them?" He said that they were arguing and they'd have to take it back to the hotel room, and that there is a broken vase on the ground, and they will have it charged to the room. Cassie said she wanted her phone and her bag. Mr. Flores said, "Miss Cassie said that she wanted to leave, and Mr. Combs said, 'You are not leaving.' He said, 'I saw inside the room a black male wearing dark clothing. Prosecutor said, what did Mr. Combs do after Cassie left? Mr. Flores said, he called for me. He was holding a stack of money, not to tell anyone. Prosecutor said, what did you say? He said, I don't want your money. The damage is going to be charged to your room. Prosecutor said, where did Cassie go? Mr. Flores said, after I spoke with her, she left. A car pulled up. She left in a black SUV. Prosecutor said, was there a driver? He says 7 feet. He said, she wanted to leave. I'm talking to her, not you. They left. Prosecutor said, then what? We went up to Mr. Combs' room to remind him of the hotel rules. He opens the door and grabs the phone and says, are you recording me? I pinned him to the wall. He said, I took photos of the broken vase to tell them to come and clean it up. I went to write the incident report. Prosecutor says, is that it? He says, my report with my name on it. Defense says, same objection. Judge says, noted. Prosecution says, then did you review the video? He says, yes. Prosecution says, I'm handing you a thumb drive with videos. The videos are then shown. Prosecution says, did it have audio? He says, no. Prosecution says, let's walk through it. Who is this? Flores says, Cassie. Prosecution, and this? Flores, Mr. Combs. Prosecution, what's happening there? Flores, she picked up the wall phone. They then ask him, what did you find when you got there? He says a broken vase. They then ask, what is at the end of this video? He says, me coming out of the elevator. They then ask, let's pull up the incident report again. He says, here, we reminded him that the checkout time was approaching. They ask, what did you add to the incident report after you reviewed the video? He said, I described what I saw in the video. They then ask him, what else did you do with the video? He said, I recorded 2 videos of it with my iPhone to show my wife when I got home. Child, he wanted to give her all the tea. So they show Flores' video of the video with his voice over it, including about how shiny his shoes were. It's played to the jury. Then they ask him, did you work the next day? He said, no, I had the next 2 days off. Then they said, when you came back in, did you look for the video? He says, I did, but it was gone. Did you ever see it again? They asked. Yes, recently. They said nothing further. Judge Subramanian. So Combs' brain still steps forward and he says, you said your report were the 5 W's, right? Flores says yes. The 5 W's are the who's, where's, why's, when's, what. So then he continues. So you mentioned that when you get off of the elevator at 11:14, maybe 11:15, you describe Mr. Combs as having a devilish expression on his face. Flores says, that's my opinion. Still says, when you get off the elevator, what's in your hand? He says, my radio. Still says, Mr. Combs didn't attack you, did he? Flores says, no. Still says, and was there any law enforcement involvement? Flores says, no. Still says, you videoed for your wife and kept it, right? Flores said, I did. Still says, but never was law enforcement called? Flores says, they were not. Still says, you told the jury Mr. Combs said to Cassie, you're not leaving, but your report did not say that, right? Flores says, at that point, I did not believe it was a significant fact. I'm not going to put down the back and forth. Damn, y'all, still got him. So Still said, so it wasn't important 9 years ago, but only now? Prosecution says, objection. Judge says, overruled. Flores says, I didn't put it in the report at the time. Still says, you only said you were offered a bribe. But hadn't you told him he had to pay for the vase? Flores says, yes. Still says, the gentleman you say you saw in the room, you described to the jury things not in your report. Flores says, he didn't engage. Still says, why didn't you ask him his name? Flores says, he wasn't talking to no one. Still says, did you tell anyone at the time? Flores says, no. Still says, and the 7-foot driver, do you know who it was? Flores says, I don't know, but Cassie knew him. Still says, you didn't put in your report that you offered to call law enforcement, but she refused. Why not? Flores says, she said no, so there was no reason to include it. Still says, you said that you put Mr. Combs against the wall. Now, isn't that aggressive? Isn't it? Flores said it could be, but I only put my forearm against his chest. Still said, but you didn't put that in your report. Flores says, you're asking me to have put more details in my report. Still says, do you remember the layout? Flores says, no, just the corner room. Still says, was it a normal hotel room like I would stay in, just one room, or did it have a living room? Flores says, I don't know. Still said, the third party, you said he was on the bed. Flores says it was a pullout. Still says, you were in the hospitality business as well as security, right? Flores says yes. Still says, Mr. Combs, it was clear to you that he wanted to pay for the damage, right? Prosecution says objection, calls for speculation. Judge says ask in a different way. Still says it can be embarrassing for a guest. Prosecution says objection. Judge said sustain. Still says 1 moment, nothing further. Judge says redirect. Prosecution says, did you typically include every single detail in your report? Flores says no. Prosecution says, did he seem drunk or high? Flores says no. Prosecution said, when he offered you money, what did you say? Flores said that he didn't want anyone to know about it, pretty much. Prosecution said, which way was Mr. Combs dragging Cassie? He says back towards the room. Prosecution says nothing further. Judge says recross. Still says there are motion sensitive cameras, so there are gaps, right? Flores says yes. Still says nothing further. Judge says next witness. So Maureen Comey from the prosecution brings forth the next witness, and she says, what did Miss Ventura pay you for? The witness says to have sex with her, and Sean Combs was there too. The witness says, my boss called me and said he couldn't find any of our black dancers, so I could go to a bachelorette party in the Gramercy Park Hotel in downtown Manhattan. Prosecution says, what did you expect to do? He says, a little stripper dance. The male dancer says she was in the hotel room in a red wig, stockings, and sunglasses. She gave me a few $100s. The prosecution says, what was the room like? The male dancer said, red couches, Astroglide, a lubricant. There was a man on the right side of the room. The male dancer continues to say, the man had on a white robe and a bandana over his face below his eyes, and his baseball cap was on as well. From his voice, I recognized him as Sean Combs. Prosecution said, what did he say? The male dancer said that he was into importing and exporting. What the hell? Male dancer said he was having problems with my boss. Defense said objection. Prosecution says, I'll get back to that. After the sex was over, what happened? Male dancer said, Cassie gave me a couple of $1,000s more. The male dancer said that Diddy said to give them my phone number, and I did. Cassie called me and asked me for a photo. Prosecution said, then what? The male dancer said, she called me to go back. I did for a few hours, and then a few times after that. Prosecution said, Combs always present? He said, yes. Prosecution says, in any other locations? He said Essex Hotel, his residence on 56th Street, I believe 210 at the time, and at her residence on West End Avenue, I think number 10. Prosecution said, what name were you to say you were there to see? He says black. Male dancer said, I would send her vulgar text messages. Prosecution said, like what? Male dancer said, you want me to say it? Prosecution said, give me an example. He said, I text, I want to F you right now. Prosecution said, how often would you use baby oil? He said, every time. Male dancer said, Sean Combs said we didn't have enough baby oil. He said, y'all slow down, separate from each other. One time he tried to have us role play like we had just met at the airport. We weren't good, so we skipped that. Prosecution said, what direction did Mr. Combs give you? The male dancer said, he tell me to step off and back off. Prosecution said, how many times, if any, were you told to urinate on Miss Ventura? Defense said, objection. Judge said, overrule. Male dancer said, they told me not to do it at all once. Defense said, objection to him saying they. Judge said, I've got it. Prosecution said, what happened afterwards? Male dancer said, they leave me waiting for hours. The whole thing might go on 10 hours. Male dancer said they were headed to the Essex Hotel. They said to go in 30 minutes. It was the first time he opened the door as himself, dressed in a suit, no mask. Prosecution said, how did things change? Male dancer says he didn't feel. Defense said, objection. Prosecution said, who, if anyone, recorded? The male dancer said, Mr. Combs with his cell phone and camcorder. He took a photo of my driver's license for insurance, he said. Defense said, objection. Judge said, Focus it. Prosecution said, what did you understand? Male dancer says, he was threatening me. Male dancer said, once I went and Cassie was slumped over, he said, it's not going to happen this time. Prosecution said, did Mr. Combs offer you drugs? Male dancer said, Molly, I guess it's called. I don't do drugs. MDMH, MDA. I think I went out and handed out $100 bills. Prosecution said, how did the Molly make you feel? Male dancer said, sick and euphoric and like an idiot, handing out $100 bills. Prosecution said, who else was present? Male dancer said, a guy who told me he was an actual escort. He was having sex with Cassie at her apartment. Male dancer said the guy was like looking at Sean Combs, and Combs said, don't you be effing looking at me. Defense said, objection. Judge said, let's get a fresh question. Prosecution said, what did he look like? Male dancer said, black guy, kind of skinny. We exchanged phone numbers. Prosecution said, have you seen him in 10 years? Male dancer said, no. Prosecution said, did it ever seem you were not the first person there? Male dancer said, yes, half used, Astroglide, towels on the floor. Prosecution said, after the $100 bills, did you see them again? Male dancer says, I couldn't do it anymore. Prosecution, what was Mr. Combs saying as he would meet Cassie? Male dancer said, he said, bitch, when I tell you to come over, you come over. I didn't know what to do. Did you intervene? Male dancer said, no. I knew that the chances were that there were bodyguards there. Defense says, objection. Judge says, sustain. Prosecution said, what next? Male dancer said, he said, are y'all ready to continue? Prosecution said, did you try? Male dancer says, I don't recall. Prosecution says, did you see them again? Male dancer says, I thought I had developed some sort of friendship with Cassie. I may have been speculating. Male dancer says, I went there. I heard him slapping her. He walked out in a towel. She ran to me. I asked, why are you staying with this guy? Defense says, objection. Judge says, ground. Defense says hearsay. Judge says overrule. Male dancer said she said it was okay. Prosecution says nothing further, and the judge breaks for cross-examination. So during the break, it's found out that the witness's name is Daniel Phillip, not Phillips, but Phillip. So then the judge says, Mr. Phillip, you are still under oath. Mr. Xavier Donaldson, who is the attorney representing Mr. Combs, says, let me show you a text message chain between you and Cassie. Is it accurate? Daniel Phillip says, yes. Defense says you were working for a service. Male dancer says, a male review show. Defense says you were a manager, male stripper for women. Daniel Phillip says, yes. Defense says prostitution was prohibited. Daniel Phillip says that is correct. Defense says your job was to build it up. Phillip says yes and no. Donaldson says I'll go with a yes. Prosecution says objection. Judge says sustain. Then the defense goes on to say, did the company open fake businesses to optimize search results? Daniel Phillip says fake addresses. It was just SEO. Donaldson says you went to optimize the lady's experience. Daniel Phillip says I have no idea what you mean. It's just our slogan. Donaldson says Cassie told you to say the name Black. Daniel Phillip says yes. Donaldson says your boss told you someone wanted a black male stripper. Phillip says yes. Donaldson says, let me show you. Prosecution says this shouldn't be on the screen. Donaldson says, take it off, take it off. Donaldson says she was wearing a wig. Phillip says yes. Donaldson says she handed you money. Phillip says yes, she handed me $4,000. Before any oil rubbing? Correct. She had on heels? Yep. And dark glasses. Donaldson, where'd the money come from? Her hand. Donaldson said, you were wearing a New York City Police Department uniform, right? Phillip said, I bought an NYPD t-shirt. Donaldson said, you took the oil off in front of Cassie? Phillip says, the oil? No, I took my clothes off. She said, it's my birthday. Donaldson said, it appears she's enjoying herself. Phillip says, yes. What was your position? Phillip says missionary. I was like, did that just happen? Donaldson said she asked you for a photo. Phillip said, I do not know if Sean Combs asked for it. Judge says, ignore that. Well, court ends up adjourning for the day, and Daniel Phillip will take the stand again in the morning. What I need to do is hear from you. What do you think about everything now going on in the trial of Diddy? Leave a comment and you know how we do. We'll talk about it down below. Talk to you guys later. Bye. Thanks for watching, but before you go, hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the bell so you don't miss out on any of my new episodes.